All right, you're very welcome along. My name's Ciaran Bradley, and I am delighted to say that I'm joined today by the Irish filmmaker and director Aoife McArdle. Aoife is the co-director of the smash hit Apple TV series Severance, which she directed alongside Ben Stiller, and I'm delighted to welcome her to the show. So Aoife, lovely to speak to you. How are you? Where are you?
I'm good, thanks. I'm in St Leonard's on Sea right now. Yeah.
Beautiful. And is that where you're based full time?
No, I'm most of the time based in Belfast actually. Yeah, just come back and forth between here and Belfast really, and then wherever a job is, I guess. So yeah, but Belfast has been my main base. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, you must have had a bit of toing and froing over the last couple of years, I'd imagine, with Severance. How's that been for you?
Well, I was actually just out in New York for most of it because I couldn't get back even if I'd wanted to. With everything that was happening with COVID, and the visa situation was like quite tricky. It took them a while to get me a visa to get me out there. So then once I was there, I didn't want to try and risk not getting back into the country again. So I was out on the ground for about almost a year, and then on either side, we did a lot of prep on either side, and then we did a lot of post production too. So those were both, I could do both of those remote, but like the main prep I did on the ground over the course of most of a year. Yeah, and because because of it, we all know what we went through with COVID, but because of that, in some way, it was super stressful in some ways because everyone was most worried about, everyone's safety, the actors' safety, the crew's safety. But then we also meant that because we kept having to stop, we had all this extra prep time, which I think has made the show have more of that kind of authored feel, So in some ways, not that I'm saying it was ever a good thing, but COVID, but the downtime, meant that I got loads of time to prep, I guess, and we all did. And so, yeah, you just like were working on it a lot, I guess. And it was such an exciting concept anyway that it was easy to sort of get inspired and spend a lot of time prepping, I think. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, we'll come on to Severance in a good bit more detail a little later. But I first came across your work with Kiss and Candice a few years ago. Kiss and Candice or Kiss and Candice? I'm always never
Oh
quite
yeah.
sure.
I mean, I think you can say either. I think Candace is what I had in my head, but I mean, I don't mind, to be honest.
Yeah, typical
I would
Brit,
even say
kind of running roughshod over the language. But yeah, it was a beautiful piece, and there was a real kind of sort of ethereal, dreamlike quality to it. Like obviously follows a young girl's kind of love story and adolescence. It felt like quite I don't mean a personal film, and that it was strictly based on your life, but it was obviously quite a passion project for you. Would you mind telling us a little bit more about that?
well, I think it was, I mean, I think all writing is based on certain aspects of your life, but I mean, I kind of based it on characters I knew really, and then it's an amalgamation of a lot of different things. I think the main thing I was interested in doing with the film at the time was, I suppose, showing a more immersive, experiential, kind of fever dream version of a teenager's life in Ireland. That was what I was interested in at the time, and so I kind of knew it was going to be, quite experimental in ways, and also that was defined very much by the budget. It was quite small budget even for a first film. So you were working within those limitations, and I was just trying to play to what I'm interested in and what I sort of learned to do over the years through my background work. And yeah, that was what I was really interested in showing that sort of, version of Ireland. It was, yeah, I suppose a sort of teenager subjective version. It was kind of slightly dystopian and slightly heightened, and yeah, so that was
That's
mostly the drive behind it. Yeah.
Yeah, there was a lot fewer chicken fillet rolls than a lot of people's upbringing in Ireland, but there we go. But that's great, and obviously, for those that don't know, you kind of made your name initially, I guess, with shorter films and some music videos, adverts, and the like. So you have a variety of skills between the writing, the directing, and the photography, for example. I imagine some of those, well, probably all of them comes to some degree instinctually, but were there ones that required a little bit more kind of mastering from your end? And do you feel one came a little bit more easy than the other? Or?
Oh, definitely. I mean, to be honest, I feel like I'm constantly learning, and that's kind of how I've always tried to approach work. I always try to take projects on where I think there's a risk element involved. I think because then even though it's kind of scary, you learn a lot. So I'd say I suppose actually my first love was actually more. I mean, in tandem with music. So it's definitely one of those kids, living like many kids in Omagh or Belfast, or like just listening to the radio and obsessing about music and taping tracks that you liked because you couldn't afford to buy records or whatever. So it started there, but then so in tandem with music, I was really into writing, and I was always into books, and they kind of brought me into film really. And my parents, like, I was lucky that my parents were kind of into movies. Like my mum and dad were, my dad was really into 40s film noir, and we used to watch a lot of those on TV. And mum then showed me like Taxi Driver in Paris, Texas. So those kind of films definitely shaped, I think, an interest quite young. And then from there, like I think from watching those kind of films that were super visual, it got me more into the photography. So in a way, the creative writing was something I'd always loved at school. And then I sort of moved away from that and got really obsessed with photography and with filmmaking, at the cinematic side of filmmaking, I think. And it is a funny thing because you do have to use one side of your brain for each. Sometimes you're like not in the zone at all to write well. Like I feel like it is it's a real balancing act that some people are absolute masters of, but I feel like I have to really like focus in to get into the right zone for writing. And if I'm off directing, then I get very obsessive about like the visual side and the storyboarding and the composition of images. But yeah, it's like it's a funny thing. Definitely, I think they definitely occupy different parts of your brain, and it's a balancing act that
I
people
imagine
in
that.
the Coen brothers are incredible at.
Oh my
Paul
God.
Thomas Anderson. It's like
Yeah, I was,
hard work, I think.
I
Yeah.
was just reading about Coen Brothers recently with regard to stuff like The Big Lebowski, and you imagine a lot of that script is not necessarily improvised, but say the kind of the tone of speech and things like that, the way the dude speaks and things like that, you'd imagine it's kind of like there's a bit of the actor's input, but apparently every little and and whatever is in the script itself. So the process is different for each one.
Yeah.
But yeah, actually on that point, I was watching the Get Back documentary, the Beatles one, the other day, and obviously there's now a reasonably famous scene of Paul McCartney kind of strumming along the Get Back tune and then gradually working out the words. Is there, I don't want to kind of lead you down the garden path of this, but like, is there a sense of like you have one aspect of it in mind, be it like visual or the sonic or the way you want it to look photography wise, or whatever, that leads you, and then you kind of the others follow? Or
I think originally when I was writing, I think for instance, I think when I was doing Kissing Candice, I was very much, my head was very much in the world building aspect of the film, and certainly themes as well. I think in themes, and I think at the time I was thinking in themes and in world building and the visual world of it, very much so. And then these days, I feel like I'm much more into storytelling, and into like I've gone back around to liking that, if I'm honest, because I think as a teenager I was hugely into like writers and storytelling. I always liked the ones that were a bit experimental, definitely, but ultimately, you can't beat a really good character story or a really good underdog story. So I think I've come back around to a love for that now, on the new pieces I've been writing. But I also just always want to be open to good scripts other people have written, which is why, like, but I sometimes think it's hard to, if you've got particular interests, sometimes you feel like you have to write your own work because you've got something in your head you really want to say or something you really want to make. So finding the exact script that suits your approach isn't always easy. So that's why I really loved Severance, because it felt like it really spoke to me, like to my interests in a really like unusually, like a kind of, a unique way, because that doesn't always happen, when so often I feel like the writing side of it for me is more just a case of, because you've got those interests, you want to make that film, and that film hasn't landed in your lap as a script yet, you know. So I think that's how I've ended up in, you know, wanting to write and direct, really. Yeah.
Necessity is the mother of invention and all that. So yeah, very good.
Well, yeah. I mean, but it's different. Like, as I said, I mean, like, you know, I thought that what Dan had written, when I read that first pilot of from Severance, I just thought this is so, you know, conceptually so strong, and I love the themes, and you know, I love that it had this anti-capitalist underdog story at its heart, and like, um, yeah, and how absurd it was. Like, I think only satire makes sense to me at the moment, and it makes sense to a lot of us at the moment because the world
Yeah.
is so weird and confusing, and like, so yeah, it almost feels like that's the only kind of genre that makes sense to us.
Yeah, it's funny actually. So I was reading something from Armando Iannucci. Someone was talking about potentially doing another series of the thick of it. And he said, you know, we're living it. Like, as in,
Yeah, that's
there's
the
no way.
thing. Reality's become so much weirder than anything you could write, and it is
Yeah,
like that is what's, you know. I mean, yeah. So I suppose that's why I think, yes, satire, it will resonate even more so in certain ways. But it's funny that he said that. Yeah, when it comes to like politics, it's like beyond us all.
well, listen, we'll leave that one there for the
Yeah,
minute because it'll be here all night. But
that road. Yeah.
well, I'm really going to dig into Severance in a kind of conceptual sense in a little bit. But just from going from reasonably small budget stuff to something like that, it was actually more, it was less on the production side itself in terms of the quality of production that you can produce with bigger budgets, but in terms of your autonomy as a director, as a producer, etc. One would imagine that there's a little bit more autonomy there on the smaller shows and films where you can choose your own people for particular roles.
Yeah.
I mean, first of all, is that the case? And secondly, was that something you had to get used to?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say I think I got autonomy over like how I was gonna put my episodes together on Severance, you know, like, and then I got to add a lot of ideas. Like, Ben's really generous in that sense that he, you know, he's quite collaborative, and he was just really wanted to push the creative and make the show as you know, really push the limits and make it as standout as possible. So I felt like he gave me a lot of room to add my own ideas to the episodes and to add to the ideas to the scripts. And so, in that sense, in terms of the adding visual ideas and moments to the scripts, I got like a lot of space, definitely. But in the sense of, you're right. Like, I didn't choose the crew, for instance, because they were already on board, and we had one crew between us. So yeah, so in that way, you're using a crew that someone else is using, which is different, you know. But you know, when they're really good, it's fine, I guess, you know. So but then I got to have input on the actors that were in my episodes, and like casting, you know, I was on the casting with Ben, and you know, input on, like, I was on the show for such a long time that I felt like I really had got to have a lot of input in the world building of the show, and that's why it was really appealing to me anyway, because I think if I hadn't got to be in on it so early, then I wouldn't have enjoyed the process as much. And I really enjoyed all the prep, particularly because it felt like we were building something very exciting together. Like, all of the, you know, and everyone on the team really added something to the show, you know, in their capacity, and everyone was sort of working at the top of their game to make it special, because we all kind of saw that in the script that Dan had written too. You know, we saw the potential of it, I guess, you know, and that it was kind of weird and different, and had a lot to say thematically about the world we're living in right now. Yeah.
Yeah, and it, you know, you mentioned Ben, and I'm allowed to call him Ben because that's Ben Stiller, and he's my mate
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
But when I saw that he was the one, or at least between you and him were the ones directing, it struck me as not necessarily a departure, but certainly not something that you wouldn't traditionally associate Ben Stiller with. In one sense, of course, obviously people develop over time, but you had mentioned a few years ago that you were looking to potentially do something sci-fi-y, and you know, it must have been tickled that itch at the same time as working with someone who I imagine is really good to learn from in a directorial sense.
Definitely. You know, it was twofold. Like, I mean, I said there was three reasons why I wanted to get involved. One primarily was I just was super excited by the pilot, and you know, that's rare for me. I just felt it had so much you know, I loved how unique and smart it was, and so that was the number one reason. I think number two, like you say, I had actually really enjoyed a show that Ben directed called Escape at Dannemora, and it was it was a true life story, but it had been authored in a very kind of particular standout way and quite elevated, and I just thought it was really good television as well. But yeah, in terms of this one, I mean, this is different, definitely, and I have been developing some sci-fi. I am really keen on doing that at some point, definitely, and it's actually really in tandem with another. Before I do the sci-fi, I hope in the future, I have another drama that I was working on that actually had a lot of parallels with it too, because it has that slightly absurd atmosphere, and it also had a very authored world where everything was white as well. So it actually had so much parallels that I had already been trying out a lot of things for that. So yeah, so it was there was three reasons really, and of course getting the opportunity to make a show where you can create really unusual imagery, and imagery that creates a sensation in the viewer and makes them feel uncomfortable, and supports the themes. I really enjoy that. I love to try and come up with visual ideas that are meaningful in some way, to give them layers. And yeah, and also I love the opportunity to work with such incredible actors, working with actors that caliber. We had different variants, we had variations. We have legends in our midst who were incredible, and then we had a lot younger actors who were just on the way up, and it was brilliant working with them too. And everyone was just everyone worked incredibly hard to make it good, basically. Yeah,
that's great. And talk me through the casting process, because one can imagine, particularly media, occasionally you bump up against people of note, and if you're sat in a chair and Christopher Walken walks in and is does his thing and then looks at you and says, "Was that okay?" And you're like, "Yeah, you're also Christopher Walken," but obviously you have to keep your professional hat on as you naturally would. But was it a reasonably surreal experience for the likes of John Turturro, Walken, etc., coming in and doing a line?
Definitely. I mean, I was huge fans of both of their work. Yeah, I mean, they've been in some of my favorite films ever. So, yeah, it was daunting. It was amazing too, and I loved the idea of them having this. I loved that I got to work on this romantic storyline with them, or kind of it felt really fresh, and I loved how people really connected with it. Out there in the audience, I think. And they really embraced it, and because they had that relationship already in real life, they're good friends. It gave the whole thing a lot, real emotional potency, I think. Yeah, so it was really fun, working on what those sequences could be, and building that slowly, and trying to keep it subtle and romantic and kind of timeless. And yeah, it was nice. Yeah. So, but yeah, they're incredible, and they're just so talented, both of them, that you do have to pinch yourself sometimes when you're behind the monitor watching them do their thing. Yeah.
Well, it's got to be a real buzz. So the 3 episodes that you directed solely, first of all, congratulations, because I genuinely think it's an amazing show. And what I was saying to friends when I recommended it was, in an era when distraction is so everywhere, phones, etc., something like Severance I took to be a little bit of a slow burner. And I don't mean that in the sense that it wasn't kind of arresting from the start. It's just more that there were certain peaks at certain points in episodes where you go, "Oh, I haven't seen that before," or "I didn't see that coming," and then it kind of builds to this obviously fantastic crescendo. Was that a particular challenge in the middle of a series where the kind of the cast or the characters have been established, to kind of keep the interest up? Not that you would be doing this kind of, it's not going to be in your head initially, but just that's such a crucial part of the series to kind of keep people going and towards the ultimate end.
Definitely. I mean, I think I was sort of hyper aware of that aspect, because it's such a, obviously Ben's doing the first 3 and the last 3, and you're kind of like building it slowly up, and then you don't want it to go lose completely. But you kind of, in a way, we always talked about that section, allowing it to be a little bit more of a rabbit hole, but at the same time, you have to keep that momentum, and you have to start answering some of the questions. You have to start enriching the characters, feeling more of their inner life, getting to know them better, understanding them more as human beings to keep your interest. Otherwise, you're not going to push on and watch the rest of the show. And I think we wanted to take the risk of the first few episodes being slow build and relying on the fact that people out there are into that and want something that kind of gets their brain going. I think that's really the truth. I think everyone likes a mystery. They like to not everyone does, that's absolutely not right, but I felt like there's enough people out there that love to slowly get to know characters, and and it was really it was a really good surprise, and we were all really happy that there were people that really connected with that aspect of it, and then they would then be involved enough to go down the rabbit hole a little bit in the middle and then keep going, but then pushing back up for the end, last 3 episodes, where obviously everything really comes to much more of a crescendo. And it was kind of like knowing what my role was in the middle was to sort of keep it interesting and keep people interested and try to find ways to do that.
Well, you did a great job.
I tried, but I think I'm pleased with the whole show. I just think it's it's really great when everyone's hard work feels like it paid off, because everyone on it worked so hard. They really did. Yeah.
I was even thinking this actually before I knew I was going to speak to you as I was watching that. In one sense, it's a very simple concept. In the idea of the kind of severing someone, so there's an innie and an outie, someone inside work and sometime outside work, but and I never once got the feeling that it was simple to execute, because obviously you've got the internal conflict of the 2 personas of each person, and then the interweaving of the different characters and the innies and outies, etc. I'm confusing myself even talking about it, but it must have is a lot of that potential, not confusion, but difficulty in interweaving things, is that kind of sorted out broadly in the script writing process, do you feel, or is that something that you guys have to also have in mind, that there are things that an innie might know that an outie might not, etc.?
No, it was a constant juggling act for all of us, and I think what added to that pressure was that we, given the nature of budgets and TV and time, we were shooting all of it out of sequence as well at the same time. Ben and I were shooting ours at the same time, which meant, and sharing crew, which meant that the crew were going straight on from his to mine and back to his. So we were having to keep the 2 worlds of these characters in our minds, as long the actors too. It was a huge, the actors really had huge amount of hats off to them for being able to do that, because we were moving back and forth, like I say, chronologically in the story constantly and how we shot it, and then they also had to keep both of those sides of their character as authentic and real as possible, and make sure they had those divisions. And like you say, absolutely, one side of them doesn't know this, and at this particular time, and so it was a real brain taxing show for everyone involved, because we all had to constantly have those in mind. And the script was incredibly clever in the first place. That what Dan wrote was, he's got such a great brain. But there were always things that would come up that nobody had thought about. That we all had to oh yeah, actually, and then we'll have to get that right. And it was a constant, you had to keep your wits about you, and you had to be alert, and you had to have your mind going, and you had to be awake. There was no we had to get enough sleep basically, and there was not much social life, because if we had we wouldn't have been able to I don't think we'd been able to execute it the way we had to, with the conditions and so on, and with COVID too. So it was
that's amazing. But it must have been and it was obviously an intensely enjoyable experience, but an intense experience all around, because obviously you're shooting a lot of it during COVID. You're trying to manage all of this, new work that you're taking on. Did you have any kind of things that you used to kind of blow off steam? Like, would you be into like mindfulness? Well, I guess mindfulness is the opposite of blowing off steam, but was it kind of did you guys manage to get out and kind of go out for a few beers or something like that?
Really though, like it's one of the only productions where, and it was purely because of COVID, it's one of those productions where I don't think a lot of us would recognize each other now, which is quite like, I've never had that before, but we were, yeah, masked and screened. And,
God.
we were really, because we had to be so mindful of safety and actor safety and crew safety. And it was the height of COVID, and it was when, there was a lot of fear about COVID as well. We didn't really understand, how dangerous it could be, and certainly could be, as we've seen, like super dangerous for certain people. So we were just so aware of that. And so yeah, we couldn't really go out to bars because New York was kind of locked down for most of it. So I think a lot of it was like, I was going out walking, like, I went, probably should have done more for the mindfulness side of things, but
Well, that's for season 2 anyway.
I get when I got some time off, or watched other people, like watched Succession. So, like that's probably what I was doing. That's my downtime. Yeah.
Well, that's good going. Like season 2, you'll be able to blow off a load of steam, I'm sure. So there will be beers the whole time now. But one thing that actually especially struck me, particularly when I kind of was doing a bit more digging around online for similar Severance fans, really, was that people definitely picked up on the photography element to it, because obviously, a lot of it is, well, it's seemingly always set in winter, and there's a lot of these kind of white scapes. But it reminded me a lot of kind of Stanley Kubrick type shooting in a lot of senses. Also, Roger Deakins has these beautiful pieces, like are similar to Piece Behind You, where you take something and just have it. You can have it as a print on its own. So I think you guys did a great job there. Was that someone in particular that would have been dealing with that outside of yourself?
Yeah, I think yeah, absolutely. Like Jessica, who was our main DOP, like she's brilliant, so talented. And what was great about the project, I think, was actually that her, myself, and Ben, we all actually have really similar likes in terms of the films and the references we were looking at. Like I know Jessica did tons of visual reference for it. I did tons of visual reference too. I'm sure Ben did too. Like I just love that side of filmmaking. So I did have like a lot of the references you mentioned, like Kubrick, and certainly always been a massive fan of Roger Deakins' work. And then also I had a lot of Yorgos Lanthimos stuff with me as well, because I thought like the absurdity of the world really suited that. And I know I was looking at Punch Drunk Love as well, like the corridors in that, and the sort of labyrinthine feel of that, like how he loses himself, kind of, it's a nice parallel to what happens to Mark in some ways. It's not a love story, but same kind of confusion, So yeah, like I think that we both, so there was a lot of research done. But yeah, I think Jessica's incredibly talented, and I can't wait to see what she does next. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, on that theme, is it straight then into season 2 for you, or do you have a bit of
I
time?
actually am doing my film now, so I don't know if I'll be able to do,
Oh.
because I left my film because I was so excited by the pilot. I just kind of left all my other projects, and so now I've been bringing them back to life since I got off Severance. So I think it just depends on the schedule, because I don't want to lose out on that either, And I do love being involved in the world building side of a show, I think. So that's kind of been done now. But we'll see. If time worked out, of course, but I think it might be quite tricky because of the film, really. Yeah.
Yeah, the creative baby's flown the nest a little bit there, but that's great. So when do we have a time schedule roughly for when the film your film will be out? Do you want to give it a plug ahead of time?
I've just been like I've been working on 2 actually. I've got 2 going. So there's like one that's getting very close now to being ready to get into prep. Yeah, but it's like it sort of depends on the location availability too, because it's like a particular there are certain locations, so that's going to define the schedule too. But then there's another one I'm developing with Film 4. So, I'm kind of at the end of the writing of one and at the beginning of the writing of the other. And so, yeah, I kind of need to do both of those things now and commit to it and not get distracted and run off and do directing on some great show. We'll see. I mean, it's hard if you get excited by something though, but
well, what if they come to you with season 4 of Succession? Would you drop it then?
It's so incredible, that show. Yeah, I love it. I just wonder if, like, I think it's because I do love that side of building a world that I would find it maybe, I don't know. Of course, like if I could schedule wise, if it could work. I mean, I'm such a fan of it. It's an incredible show. Like, nothing's made me laugh like it. But it's so darkly funny, but like I just really love that. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely see without moving on from your smash hit show to another, the influence of Jesse Armstrong. There was a massive Peep Show fanfic of it as well, and you see the themes there, right?
Definitely.
I love it so much. But I also love Severance, and I genuinely have recommended it to tons of people, and I would continue to recommend it after our chat. So, Aoife, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Ciaran. Pleasure.